Thank you all for cooperating. One of the great honors that I've had as president of the Bar Association is to get to know our Chief Judge, Rowan Wilson. Chief Judge Wilson has probably has gotten to be pretty sick of my introducing him because I've introduced him God knows how many times. But the truth of the matter is, I always look forward to what he has to say. He's very perceptive. He's very intelligent about all of the different things that he speaks of, and he speaks of a lot of things with great gravitas. I would go through his whole background, but we've probably done that a million times. What I would like to say is about the present. The Chief Judge runs our court system. He is at the pinnacle of our court system, and he does so in a way that is not dictatorial, not offensive, but he stands for exactly what we're all talking about today: civility, civics, and respect. And we're so lucky to have Judge Wilson at the helm of our court system. He has been absolutely tireless in his efforts to make our system better. And so I am very proud to be able once again to present Chief Judge Wilson.
Sorry, I was just working on a little transportation problem there with my new friend. So, good afternoon, everyone. When I gave the New York Court System's annual Law Day address, it's an obligation of the Chief Judge every year. When I gave it last year in 2023, the American Bar Association, which picks the topic every year, picked the topic Cornerstones of Democracy, Civics, Civility, and Collaboration. And in my remarks, I challenged the topic itself. My thesis was that civility and collaboration are great, they're useful, but they're not truly cornerstones of our democracy. But civics, I said, was the true cornerstone of our democracy, and one that we had let erode over the past several decades, much to our detriment. President Richard Lewis began his term as president of the State Bar Association about a month after my Law Day address, and the hallmark of his year-long tenure has been a focus on civics education, culminating with this first ever civics convocation. I'm grateful to President Lewis and to the New York State Bar Association for convening today's important conversation, and to all of you who have traveled far and wide to contribute your voices to it. I hope this is the launching pad for a long, concerted effort to diagnose the root causes that have led our state and our nation to the current crisis in civics education, an effort through which we can determine what we, as leaders of private, nonprofit, government, and educational institutions, can do to address those root causes, and an effort through which we can commit to concrete actions that will increase civic education. The pressures of this moment in history feel acute. Discord and dysfunction seems to be the hallmark of 21st century politics, and polarization the hallmark of 21st century, I'm in a time warp, society. Myriad studies draw a direct line from a deficiency in civics education for our children to a deficiency in civic engagement when those children grow up. Although we have been slowly sliding towards this place of crisis for decades, recent and unprecedented technological innovations have hastened our arrival. The birth of the internet and the creation of certain social media platforms strengthened undercurrents that were already pulling at the fabric of our society: an increasing loss of civic engagement and civic attachment, an increasing distrust of government, and an increasingly ill-informed populace accustomed to obtaining information from haphazard and unreliable sources. Those technologies have fundamentally and permanently altered our society, and they are here to stay. When faced with any crisis, we have a tendency to believe it is unprecedented and unique. This is because, despite the admonition that those who fail to remember the past are doomed to repeat it, most societies tend to obscure the past and concentrate on the present. So although the current moment feels unique, I suggest that our current dilemmas are actually old questions in modern clothing, and if we look in the right places, lessons from history can point us toward the solution we seek. For if the history of our nation is full of struggle, it is also full of the overcoming of it. Let me take you back to the last time our country experienced unprecedented and disruptive technological change, a time when technological innovations so fundamentally altered our country's societal structures and economy that it could have eroded the fabric of our democratic society. A time when we responded to that colossal societal shift with a spirit of civic inventiveness, a spirit I hope inspires each of us gathered here today. In the late 19th century, when the Civil War was behind us, the American economy was still largely agricultural, and the majority of the population lived in farm-based communities. In 1890, roughly 4 of 5 Americans lived in rural areas. Then the Industrial Revolution changed everything. Inventions like the steam boiler, fabricated steel, electricity, the incandescent light bulb, the telegraph and the telephone, the elevator, the automobile, and the electric streetcar ushered in rapid urbanization. Large cities sprang up overnight. Between 1870 and 1900, the number of cities with more than 50,000 residents tripled, from 25 to 78. By 1900, 30 million people, or nearly 40% of America's total population, lived in cities. Who made up the new urban populace? Between 1870 and 1920, 25 million immigrants arrived on our shores seeking a better life, one of the largest mass migrations in human history. The people who were moving to America's new cities were moving either from American farms or from European villages. That is, people who had never lived in cities before. As Robert Putnam, author of Bowling Alone, put it, year after year, an endless stream of hopeful emigrants from American farms and European villages poured into the anonymous teeming cities of tenements and skyscrapers. These migrants were living not merely in a new community, but in a setting so unfamiliar and disjoined that many doubted it deserved the term community at all. The wealth generated as the American economy expanded amid the Industrial Revolution was concentrated in a handful of businessmen. We still know their names today: Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Vanderbilt. These men destroyed natural resources, squashed competition, and exploited the working class while amassing unprecedented wealth. In 1896, it is estimated that the top 1% of the population owned more than half of all national wealth, while the 44% at the bottom owned only 1.2%. Working and living conditions for the poor were unconscionable. This is the era during which Upton Sinclair authored The Jungle, an expose of Chicago's meatpacking plants. Jacob Riis authored How the Other Half Lives, an examination of the horrid living conditions in New York City's tenement houses. The U.S. Supreme Court invalidated the New York labor law in Lochner v. New York, and the phrase social Darwinism took hold and was used to justify rampant social inequality. As the writer and commentator Walter Lippmann wrote in 1914, "We are unsettled to the very roots of our being. We are not used to a complicated civilization. We don't know how to behave when personal contact and eternal authority have disappeared. There are no precedents to guide us, no wisdom that wasn't made for a simpler age. We've changed our environment more quickly than we know how to change ourselves. We live in great cities without knowing our neighbors. The loyalties of place have broken down, and our associations are stretched over large territories, cemented by very little direct contact. Our schools, churches, courts, governments were not built for the kind of civilization they are expected to serve. In former times, you could make some effort to teach people what they needed to know. We have to prepare children to meet the unexpected, for their problems will not be the same as their parents. To prepare them for the unexpected means to train them in method instead of filling them with facts and rules. They will have to find their own facts and make their own rules. And if schools can't give them that power, then schools no longer educate for the modern world." That was Walter Lippmann in 1914. Disruptive, rapid technological change, extreme economic inequality, social division, poor housing conditions, mass social disorientation. Does any of that sound familiar? When the founders designed our country as a participatory democracy, they were creating a government during a time of unusually high civic engagement. As Alexis de Tocqueville observed in 1831, the American learns to know the laws by participating in the act of legislation, and he takes a lesson in the forms of government from the governing. The great work of society is ever going on beneath his eyes and, as it were, under his hands. A design choice that reflects this unusually active American populace is our dual system of checks and balances, in which federal power is divided among three co-equal branches of government, and power is also divided among the federal, state, and local governments. Decentralizing the government in this way both assumes and fosters civic participation by both bringing the government closer to its citizens and by making the government more transparent, accessible, and accountable. So how could the founders' democratic republic work in an industrialized America, a place where neighbors did not know one another, a place that strained all prior understandings of community and communal life? Those were vital questions at the dawn of the 20th century. According to historian Richard McCormick, many Americans questioned the adequacy of their institutions and wondered whether democracy and economic equality were possible in an industrial society. Happily, we rose to meet the moment. In Robert Putnam's words, during the years from 1870 to 1920, civic inventiveness reached a crescendo unmatched in American history. To start, Americans formed an unprecedented number of voluntary associations. Most of the major civic associations that we know today were established in that burst. The American Bar Association, the Salvation Army, the American Red Cross, the United Mine Workers, the Sierra Club, Goodwill Industries, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the National Audubon Society, then the NAACP, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the American Legion, the ACLU, and the League of Women Voters, just to name a few. What problems did those local associations address? At that time, I imagined that most city dwellers were homesick, not only for the actual towns or villages they left, but they were also homesick for the close-knit community lifestyle they'd left behind, the rhythm of life where one could greet and be greeted by lifelong neighbors on a daily basis, where one could contribute one's time and talents to community efforts, where one could be regularly drawn out of one's private concerns and feel like a part of something larger. These voluntary associations recreated that sense of connection, purpose, and intimacy among hectic and otherwise anonymous city life. As Americans and Europeans left their small town communities behind, they also left behind the proverbial village it takes to raise children. Many of the civic conventions of the early 20th century established public support for caring for and teaching children. For instance, the kindergarten movement, an idea imported from Germany, took off at this time. In the 1870s, the first public kindergarten opened in St. Louis, and within 10 years, there were more than 400 kindergartens in 30 states. An 1872 Boston Globe article reported, "The word kindergarten, unknown to the language 10 years ago, has now become so thoroughly anglicized as to be intelligible in the most secluded portions of the land." Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, the leading advocate of the American kindergarten movement, urged the importance of tuition-free kindergarten as a reaction to the effects of industrialization and urbanization on our city's children. What is now the National Parent-Teacher Association formed during this time as well. Founded in 1897 under the name National Congress of Mothers, the PTA's founding goal was to knit family and school communities together more tightly. In the early 1900s, we also prioritized creating safe public spaces where children could play and learn. In 1906, the Playground Association of America formed and advocated the creation of playgrounds. In a 1907 speech, President Theodore Roosevelt said, "Since play is a fundamental need, playgrounds should be provided for every child as much as schools." Enduring youth leagues were born. In 1910, the Boy Scouts of America was founded with the goal of providing young boys the character-building opportunities that were considered lacking because of the lack of nature and social community relationships in an urban upbringing. In 1912, after meeting with the founder of the Boy Scouts, Juliet Gordon Low founded the Girl Scouts as a place for girls to learn leadership skills and how to advocate for themselves and others. It is hard to imagine life now without kindergarten, the PTA, playgrounds, or the Scouts, but at that time, those were radical social innovations, and they've proved to be enduring because they so neatly address the acute needs presented by industrialization and urbanization. They drew people out of their homes and into the community with each other. They simulated the communal life of the small, self-governing villages that had been the only social paradigm for all of American history, the paradigm which our democratic republic was founded on. I believe that we today still have the same capacity of civic inventiveness that carried American democracy through a time of unprecedented social, technological, and economic disruption. What are the acute needs of our day to which we can apply that spirit? And again, a robust answer to that question is beyond what any one person can give. I hope today is only the beginning of a much longer effort, but I have two observations to contribute at the outset. My first observation is low-hanging fruit. Our children lack basic civic knowledge because we have removed it from the curriculum. Until the 1970s, it was common for high schoolers to take 3 different courses focused on civics and government. Civics about the rights and responsibilities of citizens, including at the local and state level, government about the structure and function of the national government, and problems of democracy about current issues and events, and all this in addition to a U.S. history course. Now, only 9 states require 1 full year or more of civics in high school. We offer our younger students even less of a civics education. Today, only 5 states have a standalone civics course for middle school students, and only 1 requires a full year. According to the Council of Chief State School Officers, only 10% of elementary school class time is devoted to social studies. The National Assessment of Educational Progress reports that only 20% of 8th grade students have achieved grade-level proficiency in civics. I think of myself as a civic-minded person, as someone who understands and believes in the soundness and structure of our government. I attribute that in large part to what I learned in high school. In addition to the 3 required civics and government courses, I took a civics elective my senior year, and I also spent virtually every weekend of my last 3 years of high school involved in speech and debate, extemporaneous speaking, impromptu speaking, and participating in the YMCA Youth and Government Program and Model United Nations. In particular, competitive debate, in which you had to argue both sides of a topic, helps young people see that there are 2 sides to many issues, and appreciation of the other side, even if you disagree with it, helps foster meaningful discussion and resolution of disputed issues instead of devolving into the polarized name-calling pervading politics today. And it also helps you learn to put losses behind you and keep working with adversaries on the next issue instead of vilifying them. If we wish to revitalize our democracy and reestablish faith in it, restoring a robust civics curriculum is the clear starting point. Our current focus on STEM to the exclusion of civics is a fundamental error, because the stability of a social and political fabric is what allows a nation to flourish in science and art. Because we are, thankfully, not willing to provide a stable fabric through totalitarianism, we have to do it through civics. The unique beauty of our nation is that we are not tied together by a single religion, race, or ethnicity. We are also not bound together by an ancient monolithic history. Rather, we are bound together by a set of ideals that are enshrined in our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. Just as families grow stronger through the retelling of old family lore, and just as many people of faith deepen their religious practices through the ritualized retelling of centuries-old stories, we must teach and reteach one another, generation after generation, the values on which our nation was founded, if our republic is to flourish. My second observation is that both governmental institutions and private businesses must lead the way in efforts to rebuild civics through extracurricular opportunities. It's easy to say that neither the government nor the private sector has the responsibility to explain the importance of preserving our democracy, the fundamental principles on which it is based, and the structures put in place nearly 250 years ago to implement it. But we have arrived at a point where the vast majority of our citizens have neither the will nor the comprehension to form and grow the sort of civic organizations that we began creating when facing the challenges wrought by the Industrial Revolution. And frankly, most people don't have the time or resources to form new civic organizations and recruit others to them. The distribution of wealth has moved back to near where it was in the early 1900s, with those outside of the top 5% holding a small fraction of the nation's wealth. Despite unprecedented wealth and transformative technology, most Americans are in some form of survival mode, spending a great deal of time laboring just to get by. The result is that the general population has grown more detached from, while also knowing less about, their governmental institutions. And the results are dire. A recent survey reported that 70% of Americans under age 40 do not believe that it is essential to live in a democracy. I speak only for one branch of one state's government, but let me tell you a few things that we have been up to. To start, many judges, clerks, court officers, and others working within the unified court system have been engaged for years in a variety of efforts to involve and educate the public, especially young people, about civics and the role of the judiciary. Those admirable efforts, however, have been local and dependent on the individual initiatives of certain people who have selflessly devoted their time. Effective just yesterday, we hired an exceptional attorney named Zenith Taylor, who I believe is here today, though I haven't seen her. There she is. Welcome, Zenith. Who is filling a vital new position that the court system just created, statewide civic engagement coordinator. Zenith will amplify the pre-existing efforts through both logistical support and the development and exchange of programmatic ideas throughout the unified court system. She will also promote connections between courts, schools, and the broader community to enhance the public's understanding of the role of courts, particular legal issues, significant historical events, and the importance of jury service, among many other things. In addition, last summer, for the first time ever, the unified court system funded 100 paid internships for recent high school graduates. Our interns worked in courts throughout the state and developed a hands-on understanding of the role of the courts and of the various employment opportunities to serve the people of our state. This summer, we're expanding the program by 50%. We're going to hire and pay 150 interns as part of our continuing efforts to promote a deep understanding of civics. Court employees all over the state have hosted countless student groups for courthouse tours, participated in myriad job fairs, hosted moot court and mock trial programs. We've produced a 75-page book illustrating many of the civic engagement efforts that we've undertaken by the court system last year, and distributing that and have it on our website. And corny as it may seem, the New York courts are going to have a booth at the state fair this year. There is no silver bullet here. Plentiful and consistent, modest efforts are really the only medicine to the ill we're facing. In sum, I will leave you with this. A little more than a century ago, our forebears met disruptive technological change, a change with radical civic inventiveness. If we put our minds and imaginations to it, I know we can do the same. Let's imagine and strive together and make New York the national leader on the path back to civic engagement. Now, it's a real honor for me to turn the program over to someone who is a true exemplar of imbuing our youth with civic knowledge and values, high school teacher Justin Hubbard, a recipient of the 2022 American Civic Education Teacher Award. In addition to teaching social studies at Salamanca High School, Mr. Hubbard serves as the advisor for many innovative civic-oriented groups. First, he's an advisor for the student group Salamanca Student Activists, a role in which he guides students through the process of how to make meaningful and impactful changes to their school district and their community. Mr. Hubbard is also a teacher and advisor of his school's civic engagement program, which was created in response to both a lack of civics in the social studies curriculum, as well as his students' own desire to become more engaged socially and civically. In 2022, as part of this program, he took his students on a trip to Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress for federal impact aid. As a society, we ask our teachers to do too much with too little, and I know that firsthand because both of my parents were teachers. It is unsustainable to rely on the individual generosity and initiative of incredible teachers like Mr. Hubbard. We need to put societal structures in place so that all students can have the chance to learn like Mr. Hubbard's students. Until that day, we must do everything we can to celebrate and support the Mr. Hubbards of America. Thank you all very much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go, there we go, there we go. All right. I mean, I am a teacher. You didn't think I was going to give you that one? Come on. All right. So, hi. My name is Justin Hubbard. Thank you so much for having me. Gail and Jay, thank you for inviting me to this event. You mind standing up really quick because if this doesn't go well, please see them. But my name's Justin Hubbard. I'm from Jamestown, New York. If you're wondering where that is, we're about an hour south of Buffalo, so go Bills. That's right. More specifically for Jamestown, it's the home of Robert H. Jackson, Supreme Court Justice and judge during the Nuremberg trials. So when I was planning what I was going to say today, I tried to think a lot about Robert H. Jackson, and I think the similarity is that the time is really unprecedented, just like back then. When we look around, we see a rise in authoritarian governments, catastrophic wars, economic imbalance, political social unrest, and the future seems to be really on the edge of a knife. So you get me for 30 minutes, and in that time, I'm going to solve all those problems. But I'm a social studies teacher. I went to Jamestown Community College. Any community college folks? Absolutely. I also went to SUNY Fredonia. So these are small schools that really help out small town kids like me, figuring out what we're trying to do. They're vital parts of our community, and we really need them fairly funded, which is an issue that's happening right now. I've been teaching at Salamanca for 10 years. Salamanca is located on the land of the Seneca or Onondaga people. We're located on the Allegheny Reservation, which is called the Ohio, and part of the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The school that was mentioned earlier, that is where we got to keep our school logo, the Warriors, that is our school, and some of the students that participated in that entire community process are here today. And I'm very proud to be a part of Warrior Nation. Being from a district that has so many Indigenous students, I am very happy with the decision from the Board of Regents to unanimously vote to ban the use of those Native American mascots, caricatures at our New York State schools. Like was mentioned earlier, these derogatory images, they not only harmed Indigenous youth, but I think really they harmed all youth and all citizens, because ignorance only breeds misunderstanding and conflict. Outside of school, I'm actually involved in activism, advocacy, and community organizing. For me, that really got started in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter movement. This happened because the murder of George Floyd really impacted me and millions of other people in the United States. That's when I started working in my own community. Rallies, marches, committees, talking to councils, having so many phone calls and meetings with elected officials. I thought that at the time that I was really doing the work, as they say, but it was at my own job, at my school, where I realized that I think I was doing the most important and impactful work. The Salamanca School District has really empowered me given me the opportunity to have some great and I think important work with our students. I've been able to teach civics at our school for about 4 years now. It started right when we got back from school, or back from the summer in 2020. And 2 of my seniors, who are now juniors or graduating in college, got a hold of me and they wanted to have meetings about, as they called it, all the stuff that was going on. So I thought that this would be a great and easy way to connect with 2 students that I really didn't have as much time with anymore because they were no longer in my classroom. Now, when I say we were back from school, what I mean is that I was sitting in my classroom alone, and all of my students were on my screen. And when I mean all my students, I mean half of my students, and when I mean half of my students, I mean half of them, because the other half were on their phones. Or sometimes they would log in and they were asleep, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, but these meetings were different because I figured out that all the stuff was actually what the students wanted to be engaging in. It's what they wanted to talk about. So the first meeting, and this was when I thought I was good at Zoom, I had 30 students come in. And that meeting, I think, lasted 2.5 hours. It could have gone longer. Because turns out all the stuff was Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ rights, climate change, the 2020 election, missing murdered Indigenous women, sexist dress codes, tribalism, and everything else in between. And once word got out that that's what Mr. Hubbard was talking about, the meetings got bigger. Teachers got involved in those meetings, and then admin got involved in those meetings. And really, after a couple weeks, what the students realized is that what they wanted, what they needed, wasn't just a couple meetings to talk about all this stuff. It was a club, it was an organization. And I give my district a lot of props here because not a lot of districts are willing to embrace and encourage student activism, which is what this was. My assistant superintendent at the time, who's my current superintendent, joked that when he approved this club that he was giving rise to his own demise for his career. And he was thinking that they would be going directly after administration. Instead, the Salamanca Student Activists, or SSA, they were interested in raising the pride flag on school grounds, which scared the heck out of everybody, right? This was in Cattaraugus County, New York, which is the most conservative county in New York State. So, obviously, being the advisor of this club, I was like, maybe I won't be advisor for too much longer, but what I was able to do is see this as a civics problem, see this as something where we could really focus on the process, right? So my students wanted to raise, as they said, a pride flag. Well, we went through what pride flag, had them do the research on it, come to a consensus, vote on it, then they had to meet with their principal. After they met with their principal, they had to make an educational video. After the educational video, hour-long meeting with the superintendent. After meeting with the superintendent, the real work began because they went around staff by staff, teacher by teacher, to get them to sign a petition. And as you're finding out now, teachers, especially social studies teachers, are really long-winded. So to get that one signature sometimes took an hour. Yeah, but they did the work. Then it came down to school board meeting, presenting to the school board, and unanimously our school board passed that they would raise the progressive pride flag on school grounds, and it has been up since 2021. Now, after the vote, the real work honestly had just begun, because then came the Facebook comments, right? So that was another lesson as well. But on June 3rd, 2021, we got the pride flag raised on school grounds. And absolutely, if you want to clap to that, please do, yes. But to me, as a civics teacher, really a civics nerd, it wasn't just about the pride flag. It was about the process, the same process that was used to come up with this banner, to acknowledge the harm, the generational harm that was done to families in our community and so many other indigenous families with the issue of residential boarding schools. So it was about the process. I think most of the time when I look at government, when I look on my television, I see government as something that can be very discouraging and can stop change. But I've learned to teach and encourage our students to go through the process, to persevere, to organize, motivate, research, to present. And that's not just about being passionate about an issue, because if you're looking for passion, it's really with our youth. That's where the passion, that's where the energy is. And it's not just about teaching the foundations of our nation, and it's not just about teaching students to be proud to be Americans. All of that is important. But for me, it's about our youth learning how to advocate, learning how to find a common ground, to make changes, to get stuff done. To me, that is what civics actually is. Since that time, our district has really gone headfirst into civics education. We heard so much about it earlier, but when it comes to the Seal of Civic Readiness, well, we were one of the pilot schools when it comes to the Seal of Civic Readiness, and I think that this is honestly an amazing initiative that I only hope keeps advancing. From then on, we came up with a civic education program. We now teach AP Government and Politics. We have multiple student affinity groups like the activist group, but also our student government, Indigenous Youth Council, Gender Sexuality Alliance, Black Student Union, and different select programs to really help our student voice be elevated. The capstone requirement when it comes to the Seal of Civic Readiness, I love it because it allows me as a teacher to empower my students to explore our systems of power, those foundational governments, social justice, activism, understanding your rights as a person, but as an American as well. And obviously that's my favorite program because that's the one that I get to teach. But the real dynamic change didn't just come in isolated programs in classrooms working in silos. It came from our approach as a district. when I went to high school, and then when I went to college, social studies, the way that it was taught and presented to me, the teachers were supposed to be in the middle, non-biased, never presenting their political opinion. And I think that that is extremely important and has a lot of validity. But what it really does to many young teachers is it scares them away. It gets them to stop talking about the hard conversations, the hard topics. They're afraid of being seen as biased. And because of that, we don't talk about topics like the enslavement of black people, Native American genocide and erasure, LGBTQ discrimination, wealthy corporations, discrimination against women, systemic generational poverty, money in politics. All of these tough topics, many teachers will not touch in their classrooms, which means that our youth are not getting a full education. We're not actually preparing them for the world that they're entering. And in some states, we're completely erasing a lot of these topics. We're trying to change the history. And we're trying to keep the status quo. But keeping the status quo is not really our job. A part of our job, and one that I think needs to be embraced, is to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. That's what I see really my job is. There's a truth when it comes to what is actually happening in our country, and it needs to have light shed on it. So the reality that all of you know, and I think it's why you're here, is that our political system is just a mess, right? We have one of the most ineffective federal governments in American history when it comes to passing legislation. Polarization and tribalism have really taken the place of cooperation and consistent representation. It's more about, or it's more important for a politician to get on television, to roast the person from across the aisle, and then to get retweets and likes on Facebook because that goes to their campaign dollars. That's what our legislative system is really broken down to. And our students see that, and they really don't want to be a part of that. They see that machine not working. So that only breeds more apathy. But in my classroom, and I see many other classrooms in my district, we're embracing the hard conversations. And in civics, especially right now, when we talk about how bad the system is, how ineffective it is, how tribal and cultural it is, that's the stuff that you have to talk about. If you're actually teaching civics, you have to step into that. So, woohoo. Gotta flip that page, thank you. Sometimes I don't need to say anything at all when it comes to these conversations because my students have more knowledge on these topics than I do. And I think if you go to our high schools, our middle schools, when it comes to these topics, the students have already been really swimming in them, sometimes for years. But it's not just about engaging them in the conversations of today. The question is what to do about the students who could really care less about politics. How do you get them engaged? Like we said earlier, in New York State, you only need one semester of government education. So how do we start incorporating civics ed into our other social studies classes, and how do we then start incorporating that into all of our subjects? One thing I think you can do is really focus on those foundational texts. For example, I think I'm behind a little bit. Boop. Right there. Okay. For example, you can talk about Federalist 10. This is required for the AP Government class, but really what Federalist 10 is doing is it's talking about radicalization. It's talking about tribalism. So that's a great document to really dive into. After that, you can talk about Brutus 1. Brutus 1, we're really discussing if our federal government can be too big, if it can become corrupt, if we can have a tyranny of the majority. And the document that I really like talking about is Letter from a Birmingham Jail. I think that every student in America should read Martin Luther King's Letter from a Birmingham Jail because there's so many conversations that we can have just from that document. First of all, he wrote it in jail. Yes. And I always love tuning in on the third Monday in January for Martin Luther King Day and seeing all the politicians that are retweeting quotes from that same speech of Martin Luther King, that one segment of it that we all know, right? But we avoid the fact that Martin Luther King, at his time, was seen as an agitator, an extremely controversial figure, and, as this picture shows, and the title of that letter, a criminal. He was breaking laws. And I think a lot of our students can see some commonality there when the topics that they want to talk about or the methods that they want to go about their activism is seen as agitation and at times criminal. So this letter allows our students to examine the laws, weigh them to see if they are actually just. It also elevates the conversation of the nature and purpose of protest and civil disobedience. And in that letter, see, Dr. King saw white moderates who told civil rights activists that while they agree with them, they didn't agree with the way they were going about it, or that they should wait just a little bit longer. He saw them as the greatest barrier to civil rights. And lately I've heard from my students that they see the exact same thing happening on college campuses right now when it comes to their activism. That while they see so many pundits and anchors on our national news stations talking about how we may agree with what they're doing, but not the way they're doing it. I had a student just 2 days ago say, isn't that the exact same thing that happened in the 60s? And I didn't say a thing. I was just, Right? So, the document, it's brought up amazing conversations in my classroom, and I think that it'll honestly have the same effect on most classrooms. Another strategy that you could bring into a classroom or encourage teachers to bring into their classroom is to talk about Supreme Court cases. And I think, being the person that gets to go before one of our 9 Supreme Court justices, I have to talk about the Supreme Court, right? So, every single student in America should know about Tinker v. Des Moines. Sometimes students believe that their rights do disappear when they enter the school building, but we all know that this is in fact not what the Constitution says. From there, we can discuss free speech, we can discuss political speech in schools, and we can discuss what is actually disruptive when it comes to the learning environment. By the way, in my classroom, it always brings up dress codes, which most of my students say are sexist, and most of the time, I absolutely agree with them, right? So, from there, though, you can bring up a much more, I'd say, relevant and timely case. This is Mahadi Area School District versus BL. Does anyone know this case by name? It's a really fun one. This is more popularly known as the cheerleader case because this girl did not make her varsity cheer team. She made JV. She was quite upset. So she went home, and just like many of my students do, she got on Snapchat. And on that Snapchat, she posted, and I want to be very accurate with this, F softball, F school, F cheer, F everything, except she didn't use F. She used the whole word. Yeah. Now, she was suspended from her JV team. They kicked her off. But she went all the way to the Supreme Court, and she won because they said that the school was violating her First Amendment rights. See, this case is what gets my students engaged because they're all on Snapchat, and they all want to say that kind of stuff about the school, right? Another foundational case that is required in most government classes is Engel v. Vitale in 1962, right? This case lays out a clear interpretation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and bans teacher-led prayer in schools. Again, we're bringing in student rights, but also opening a conversation on religion in schools. Great way to discuss the reciting of the Pledge of Allegiance when it comes to my classroom, but especially for my district, it leads to a fantastic conversation about Thanksgiving addresses and land acknowledgments when it comes to Native American territories. And the more recent case that I like to bring in is Kennedy v. Bremerton. So in this case, there was a football coach that would lead a prayer on the 50-yard line at the end of every game. He was asked by his school district not to do that. He did it anyway. He was fired and went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they actually ruled in his favor. Now, I bring this case up in my classroom because some of the kids are on the football team. And one of my students this year got really upset about this case. And he was on the football team, and I asked him why. He said, because if a coach went to the 50-yard line and prayed, there's no way that I wouldn't be the first one there, because I don't want that to cost my spot on the team. Those conversations, that's civics, and it actually impacts their lives. And this just happened 2 years ago. So this is the stuff that really gets the kids talking, and this is civics. Now, those are just some ideas that you could integrate into government classes or U.S. history. But for the ones that are really passionate, for the ones that want to address issues that they care about, this is where we need to start elevating student voices. And this up here is 2 of my students' work from just a month ago. I say let them pursue their interests, let them pursue their passion projects. If students are going to do a research project, in my opinion, in my classroom, nothing is off limits. So we've had projects, entire capstone projects that where a year of school is dedicated to LGBTQ rights, sexual assault, abortion, student rights, black representation in media, cannabis legalization, even government conspiracies and aliens. That was a topic this year. All of these topics are free game in my classroom because all of them are civics. So we take a broad topic that they're interested in, and through research and through the process, they're able to really figure out how it impacts them and how it impacts their community, and then we send them out to make an action, to actually have an impact on their community, on their local government, or on just their school. This empowers our students because it doesn't just give them a sense of ownership, it gives them a sense of impact. And when it comes to high schoolers, that's really what they're looking for. They want to make an impact. But elevating student voice needs to go beyond just the curriculum. It's the moments outside of the classroom that can make the most difference in our students' lives. The best example that I can give is the annual trip that my civics engagement class takes to Washington, D.C. See, because Salamanca is located on the Seneca Nation, we're on a reservation, so we cannot tax our citizens based on property value. We're what's known as federally impacted, so that's schools on reservations, military bases, and other federal property. In the past, we have sent superintendents and board members down to D.C. to lobby on our behalf for increases in federal impact aid. Starting in 2020, right after our superintendent met with our students about the pride flag, he said, I'd really love to use them when it comes to lobbying. So we had them meet on Zoom with a couple of our elected officials. And then, year after that, we started sending them to DC. And since we started 3 years ago, we have been able to meet with, as this picture shows, Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, Mark Wade Mullen, but also our own representatives, Sharice Davids. And the class favorite, though, is Rosa DeLauro. She is the congresswoman with purple hair. So she's extremely popular when it comes to my class. But the leadership opportunities, they really don't stop there because they were able to lobby in D.C. They got to meet with Chuck Schumer when he came to the Seneca Nation. And after that, they were invited to present at the New York State School Board Association conference. After that, a couple of my students presented at the National Council for the Social Studies conference. After that, a few of them are here today to talk to Justice Sotomayor. It just creates more and more opportunities once you put them in those leadership positions. But all of those were really orchestrated and well planned. But moments like this were not. And these are moments, civics moments, that I think really make an impact. Moments that elevate student voice, they're found outside of the classroom structure, outside of the plan. They're the ones that I think make the lasting impact. For example, my 2 students here, Gasanite and Grem, they both approached me before we took the trip to DC, that instead of wearing suits and ties and what I saw as, professional dress, they wanted to wear their traditional regalia. And I talked to a couple of my colleagues about this, and I said, no, it's not really appropriate. Once I thought about it, I realized that it is extremely appropriate, but also gives them ownership. It was an idea that they came up with. It was authentic. It was from the grassroots, right? So it empowered them and really gave them a sense of impact when they went there. Because what they realized that I didn't at the time is that they weren't just representing our school or my classroom, they were representing their town, their nation, their people, their culture. And since then, I've had students wear regalia every single year, and they've only advanced it. I have students that start the meetings out speaking in their native language, in Seneca, which is an extremely powerful way to automatically take ownership and give them the power when it comes to those conversations. Gus, Nite, and Graham also started this tradition of taking a picture in regalia right in front of the Columbus statue in Columbus Circle. And again, I think it's a cool photo op, but it was more than that. This is more civics, right? This is an act of defiance. It's an act of representation. These are the moments that I think are the ones that our students really remember and have a great influence on their lives moving forward. One more moment I wanted to talk about after we look at this picture, because this is from this last year. And you can see there that not only did our students, Joe that's pictured in this right here with his Gustoet on, not only did our students get to go to these lobbying meetings, but while they were in the Senate office building, they were able to meet with other Indigenous activists that were lobbying that day too. And that was a really authentic moment that we could not have planned for, right? But if we go back to that first lobbying session, where one of my students, Riley, who was a part of that activist group, she was meeting with our now retired Congressman Tom Reed, a Republican, and she wanted to talk to him about raising the pride flag on school grounds. And I was like, okay, go for it. And she thought that she was going to get into a little debate with him, which is really what she wanted to do. But the moment she was done talking about that issue, Tom Reed goes, well, yeah, I 100% support that initiative. In fact, I'm one of the few Republicans in Congress that has voted in support of rights for LGBTQ youth. And what that did is it allowed our students to see that there was a common ground there. And that's something that's been a theme throughout the day, is really finding that common ground between viewpoints that we see as opposed, between blue team, red team, right? Finding that common ground. And that's what I really try to emphasize in our classroom. See, the word compromise, we use that word quite a bit. And when it comes to compromise, many of our younger people see that as a bad word because they think that they're giving up ground. But finding common ground is what we really should be pushing for. Too often in our current politics, we don't actually do that. We don't try to find the common ground. We don't try to find our common humanity. We focus on what makes us different instead of what makes us alike. We can't continue to do that with our students. As schools, we have the responsibility to not only teach civics, but to do it in a way that empowers our youth and helps them find this common ground. If we don't address civics and politics in the classroom, our students are going to seek out other ways to get into these hard conversations. And what we know is that the political socialization will then happen on social media. And social media radicalizes our students. It leads them to more polarization, more tribalism, more conspiracy theories, and can lead to political violence, and we've all seen it. We can't allow this to continue, and we have a responsibility as educational institutions in our communities to provide our students with the spaces to explore and practice our democracy. Now, obviously, this is going to fall into the hands of our teachers. And I know most in here are not teachers, but are there other teachers in the building at all? Can we give them a round of applause because it is Teacher Appreciation Week? Thank you very much. So, I know that most of you are not teachers, but I think you can be great allies to teachers. So, right now we're at a moment in crisis, and again, it was talked about earlier today, but there's a massive teacher shortage. that most districts are struggling with. Right now, teachers are asked to do more with less. We're spread too thin, like butter over too much bread sometimes. Teachers deserve to be treated with respect, not only from students and parents, but from our society as well. We're professionals, skilled artists of our craft. I would say let us do our jobs, stop the politically driven movement to censor history, to leave out minority and LGBTQ people from our curriculums, and ban books. As a social studies teacher, and it was mentioned earlier, I also have to say that more financial support to the subject would be great. It kind of blew my mind earlier when someone said federal government gives $50 per year to STEM and 5 cents a year to me. Yeah, that's what I saw it. I saw it as legit, like my congressman handing me a nickel, and I was like, here you go, right? STEM may be the key to all the jobs in the future, and I constantly hear that. But we won't have a future without a strong, stable government and an educated and engaged citizenry. Yeah. And finally, we need to incentivize people to join the education field. It's really hard when I talk to my students that I think are amazing students and I think could make amazing educators about the prospects of being a teacher in the future. In fact, some of the conversations I've had over the last few days are younger people saying that teaching isn't actually viable, that it won't give them stability that they need. Now, I know that you in this room can't just raise teacher pay, but there are many steps that we can take. I had a conversation earlier about our retirement system. Right now, me and so many people my age and younger are on Tier 6, and this is something that is not incentivizing people to join the education field. So I think first step we can take is really to fix Tier 6 retirement. Yes. All right. And more of my students. So first, before I go, thanks again for inviting me to this. This is an amazing opportunity. It's not very often that a teacher like myself gets to take this type of position and talk to so many important people. So I really appreciate that opportunity. I'd like to thank my school district for continuing to empower me and letting me take 3 days to come here during May, which, as we said earlier, during May and June, not a lot of stuff happens, right? So, I also would like to take my time, thank my coworkers. I come from a great school with a great social studies department, and they only make me better as an educator. Also, I get to work with some amazing students, and really this is the reason that I do what I do and why I love my profession, why I love my job. And 3 of them are here today, and I'm not going to introduce them now because you get to hear from them very soon. They're the ones that really give me hope for the future. In a time of political turmoil, social unrest, tribalism, radicalization, all of the things that I mentioned earlier and all of the reasons why you're here, it can be really dark when you look at the landscape of what's going on. There are times when I would love to live in a less tumultuous time, or as my students say, can unprecedented events stop happening? Can we have more precedented times? Yeah. But for that, I always repeat my favorite author, which is J.R.R. Tolkien, right, or author of The Lord of the Rings, which is we don't get to decide the times that we live in. All that we get to decide is what to do with the time that's given to us. And for that, I always like to go back to John Lewis and encourage all of us in this room and all of my students, past, present, future, to continue to get into good, necessary trouble, because that's, to me, what civics is, and that's going to be what really helps us change the systems that need to be changed. Thank you.